The rain fell in sheets that summer evening in 1882, turning the dusty streets of Seattle, Washington into rivers of mud. And Quincy Lawson had never seen a woman look so utterly broken as the one sitting on the steps of the abandoned mercantile. Her dress was soaked through, clinging to her thin frame, and her dark hair hung in wet ropes around her face. She did not look up when his boots splashed through the puddles, did not acknowledge his presence even as he climbed the 3 wooden steps and lowered himself beside her. The rain drummed on the overhang above them, creating a curtain of water that separated them from the rest of the world. Quincy removed his hat and set it on his knee, letting the rain soak into his shirt. He did not know this woman, had never seen her before in his 26 years of living in and around this growing town, but something about the way she sat there, staring at nothing, made him stay. "Tell me what you need," he said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the storm. She turned her head slowly, and he saw her face properly for the first time. She could not have been more than 23 or 24, with gray eyes that held an ocean of sorrow and cheekbones sharp enough to cut. There was a bruise forming along her jaw, dark purple against pale skin. She began, her voice hoarse and cracking. "I need my husband to stay dead." The words hung between them like a confession, and Quincy felt his breath catch. She looked away again, back out into the rain, and he saw her hands trembling in her lap. "He died 3 months ago," she continued, though Quincy had not asked. "Fell from his horse drunk and broke his neck. They buried him in the cemetery outside of town, and I thought I was free. I thought it was over." Quincy waited, understanding that she needed to speak, needed someone to simply listen. But his brother came today. Nathaniel. He says I belong to him now, says it is his right to take care of his brother's widow. He is waiting for me at the boarding house. He says if I do not come to him willingly, he will take me by force. Her voice broke on the last word, and she wrapped her arms around herself. So I ran. And I kept running until I could not run anymore, and now I am sitting here in the rain like a fool because I have nowhere to go. Quincy looked at her profile, at the determined set of her jaw despite the fear in her eyes. "What is your name, Katherine?" she said. "Katherine Cooper." "Well, Katherine Cooper, I am Quincy Lawson, and you do not have to go back to that boarding house." He stood up, holding out his hand to her. "Come with me." She stared at his hand as if it were a snake that might bite. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "No, I do not," Quincy agreed. "But I know what it looks like when someone needs help, and I know what it is like to feel trapped. Come on now. You will catch your death out here." Katherine studied his face for a long moment, and whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she placed her small, cold hand in his and let him pull her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he realized she probably had not eaten all day. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes." "Good." "My horse is just down the street. We are going to my ranch. It is about an hour outside of town." "Your ranch?" She pulled back slightly. "Sir, I cannot just go to your ranch. That would be entirely inappropriate." Quincy almost smiled at her concern for propriety when she had been sitting in the rain contemplating her own survival moments before. "My sister lives there too. Clara. She is 19 and studying to be a teacher. She will act as chaperone, and she will be glad for the company." "We do not get many visitors." Katherine hesitated, then nodded. "All right, thank you." They hurried through the rain to where Quincy's gelding stood tied outside the saloon, looking miserable and wet. Quincy untied the reins and swung up into the saddle, then reached down for Katherine. She placed her foot on his and let him pull her up behind him. She sat side saddle, gripping his jacket with both hands to steady herself. The ride out of Seattle took them through increasingly rough terrain, the trail turning muddy and treacherous. Katherine did not complain once, though Quincy could feel her shivering against his back. The rain began to let up as they climbed into the foothills, and by the time the ranch house came into view, it had stopped entirely. The house was modest but well built, with a barn and a corral visible in the fading light. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Quincy felt the familiar sense of relief he always experienced upon coming home. A young woman burst out of the front door before they had even dismounted, her blonde hair flying loose around her shoulders. "Quincy, you are hours late. I was beginning to worry that you had drowned in town." "I am fine, Clara," Quincy said, sliding down from the saddle and reaching up to help Katherine. "We have a guest. This is Katherine Cooper. Katherine, my sister Clara." Clara's eyes widened as she took in Katherine's bedraggled state, but to her credit, she did not ask questions. "Well, goodness, you poor thing. Come inside right now. Quincy, see to your horse and then bring in some extra firewood. Katherine, you are going to catch pneumonia in those wet clothes." Katherine allowed herself to be swept into the house by Clara's efficient care, and Quincy smiled despite himself. His sister had always had a gift for making people feel welcome. He led his horse to the barn, unsaddled him, and made sure he was rubbed down and fed before heading back to the house with an armload of wood. Inside, he found Katherine sitting by the fire wrapped in a quilt, her hair drying in messy waves around her face. She held a cup of tea between her hands and looked less like a drowned ghost and more like a living person. Clara was bustling around the kitchen, preparing supper. "I put some of my clothes in the bedroom for her," Clara said, not looking up from the pot she was stirring. "Once she has warmed up a bit, she can change." Quincy set the wood down by the fireplace and took a seat at the table. "Thank you, Clara." His sister shot him a look that said they would be talking later, but she kept her questions to herself for now. They ate supper together, a simple meal of stew and bread, and Quincy noticed that Katherine ate like she had not had a proper meal in days. When the dishes were cleared away, Clara showed Katherine to the small bedroom at the back of the house. "She can stay as long as she needs," Clara said when she returned to the main room. "Now tell me what happened." Quincy explained, keeping his voice low, and watched his sister's expression shift from curiosity to anger. "That is despicable," Clara said when he finished. "What kind of man thinks he has the right to claim a woman like property? The kind who was raised to believe women are property," Quincy said grimly. "We need to be careful. If this Nathaniel comes looking for her, there could be trouble." "Let him come," Clara said fiercely. "We will not let him take her." Quincy looked at his young sister and felt a surge of pride. Their parents had died when Clara was just 10, and he had raised her himself, working the ranch and making sure she got an education. She had grown into a strong, intelligent woman who did not back down from a fight. "We will protect her," Quincy agreed, "but we need to be smart about it." The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the air clean. Quincy woke early as always and went out to do his chores, feeding the horses and checking on the cattle in the near pasture. When he returned to the house, he found Katherine already up, dressed in one of Clara's simple cotton dresses, helping his sister make breakfast. "Good morning," Katherine said, and he was struck by how different she looked. Rested and clean, with some color back in her cheeks, she was genuinely beautiful. "I hope you do not mind me making myself useful. I am not accustomed to being idle." "Not at all," Quincy said, hanging his hat by the door. "We appreciate the help." Over breakfast, Katherine told them more about her situation. She had been married at 19 to a man named Joseph Cooper, a ranch hand who had seemed kind enough during their courtship. But once they were married, he had revealed himself to be a mean drunk with a vicious temper. She had endured 4 years of his cruelty before his accident had freed her. I should feel guilty for being glad he is dead, Katherine said quietly, staring at her plate. But I cannot. All I felt when they told me was relief. That is not something to feel guilty about, Clara said firmly. You survived. That is what matters. Katherine looked up at her with tears in her eyes. Thank you for saying that. I have not had anyone to talk to about it. Everyone in town thought Joseph was such a good man. They did not see what happened behind closed doors. They never do, Quincy said, and something in his tone made both women look at him. He did not elaborate, but the memory of his own father's temper, the way his mother had flinched at sudden movements, was never far from his mind. It was part of why he had vowed never to raise his hand to a woman, never to let anger control him the way it had controlled his father. The days began to settle into a routine. Katherine stayed in the small bedroom, helping Clara with the household chores and learning to cook on the wood stove. Quincy worked the ranch, riding out each morning to check on the cattle and repair fences. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, and slowly, Katherine began to smile again. Quincy found himself looking forward to those evenings more than he cared to admit. Katherine was intelligent and well-read, able to discuss everything from politics to poetry. She had a sharp wit that Clara appreciated, and she did not shy away from voicing her opinions. But more than that, there was a strength in her that called to something deep in Quincy's chest. She had survived something terrible and come through it still able to laugh, still able to hope. It was 2 weeks after Katherine's arrival that trouble found them. Quincy was in the barn when he heard the sound of horses approaching. He stepped out into the sunlight and felt his jaw tighten. 3 men sat on horseback in his yard, and the one in the middle had the same sharp features as Katherine, the same gray eyes, though his held nothing but cruelty. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Quincy asked, keeping his voice level. "I am looking for my sister-in-law," the man said. "Katherine Cooper. I have been told she might be here." "Who told you that?" "Does it matter? I am her family. I have a right to know where she is." Quincy crossed his arms. "Katherine is an adult woman. If she does not want you to know where she is, that is her choice." The man's eyes narrowed. "You are harboring my brother's widow. That makes you complicit in her abandonment of her responsibilities." "Her only responsibility is to herself," Quincy said, "and I think you should leave my property now. Not without Katherine." The man made a move to dismount, and Quincy heard the door of the house open behind him. He did not need to turn to know that Katherine had come out. "Nathaniel," Katherine said, her voice steady despite the fear Quincy could hear underneath it. "I told you I am not coming with you." "Katherine, be reasonable," Nathaniel said, his voice taking on a cajoling tone that made Quincy's skin crawl. "You are my responsibility now. I am only trying to do right by you." "By forcing yourself on me." Katherine stepped up beside Quincy, and he could see her hands were shaking. "I know what you want, Nathaniel, and you will never have it. I would rather die than let you touch me." Nathaniel's expression darkened. "You ungrateful girl. After everything my family did for you." "Your family did nothing but make my life a misery," Katherine shot back. "Joseph is dead and I am free, and I am not going to let you trap me the way he did." Nathaniel looked at Quincy. "You have no right to keep her here." "I am not keeping her anywhere," Quincy said calmly. "She is staying of her own free will, and I am telling you one more time to get off my land." For a moment, Quincy thought Nathaniel might try to fight, but the man looked at him, took in his size and the determined set of his jaw, and evidently decided against it. "This is not over," he said, jerking his horse's head around. "Katherine, you are making a mistake. You will come crawling back to me eventually." "Never," Katherine said, and Quincy heard the steel in her voice. They watched the 3 men ride away, and only when they were out of sight did Katherine let out a shaky breath. Quincy turned to her and saw that she was trembling all over. "You were very brave," he said gently. "I do not feel brave," Katherine whispered. "I feel terrified. What if he comes back? Then we will deal with it," Quincy said. "You are safe here, Katherine, I promise you that." She looked up at him, and something passed between them, something electric and unspoken. Clara cleared her throat from the doorway, and the moment broke. "Come inside," Clara said. "You need to sit down." That night, after Clara had gone to bed, Quincy and Katherine sat by the fire together. The house was quiet except for the crackle of burning wood and the distant sound of coyotes calling to each other. "Why are you helping me?" Katherine asked suddenly. "You do not owe me anything. You could have just walked past me that night in the rain." Quincy considered his answer carefully. "I suppose I could not stand the thought of walking past someone who needed help, and maybe because I know what it is like to feel trapped." "What do you mean?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "My father was a hard man. He worked this ranch, built it from nothing, but he had a temper that could turn on a dime. My mother bore the brunt of it. I was just a boy, too small to stop him, but I used to lie awake at night listening to her cry and wishing I was big enough to protect her." Katherine's hand found his, her fingers lacing through his own. "I am sorry. She died when I was 16. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but I think she just gave up. She was tired of fighting, tired of being afraid. My father followed her a year later, and suddenly Clara and I were alone. I vowed then that I would never be like him, that I would never make someone feel the way my mother felt." "You are nothing like that," Katherine said softly. "You are kind and good, and I am grateful for you every single day." Quincy turned to look at her and found her face very close to his own. Her eyes reflected the firelight, and he could see every detail of her features, the faint scar on her chin, the way her lips parted slightly as she looked at him. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough. "Yes, I am glad you ran into that rain. I am glad I found you." She smiled, a real smile that lit up her entire face. "So am I." The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a month. Katherine fit into their lives as if she had always been there, as if the ranch house had been waiting for her. She and Clara became close friends, often staying up late talking and laughing together. But it was the time Katherine spent with Quincy that made her heart race and her breath catch. He began teaching her to ride properly, not just side saddle but astride, in a pair of his old trousers that Clara had altered to fit her. They would ride out across the ranch lands together, Katherine's dark hair flying behind her, her face flushed with exhilaration. Quincy would watch her and feel something expanding in his chest, something warm and terrifying and wonderful all at once. One evening, they were out checking on a section of fence that needed repair when Katherine's horse shied at a snake. She stayed in the saddle, but only just, and when Quincy reached her side, he found her laughing breathlessly. "That was exciting," she said, patting her horse's neck to calm him. "You are a natural rider," Quincy said, unable to keep the admiration out of his voice. Katherine grinned at him. "I never had the chance to really ride when I was married. Joseph said it was not proper for a wife to go gallivanting around on horseback, but I love it. I love the freedom of it." "You should have whatever freedom you want," Quincy said, and the intensity in his voice made her turn to look at him. "Quincy, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "I have been thinking about what happens next. I cannot stay at your ranch forever, living off your charity. I need to find work, find a way to support myself." "You do not need to think about that yet," Quincy said quickly. "You are welcome to stay as long as you want." "But that is just it," Katherine said. "I do want to stay. I want to stay forever if you will let me. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life, and I know it is because of you." Quincy's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Katherine, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Quincy Lawson," she said, her voice shaking but her eyes steady on his. "And I know it is too soon. I know I should wait, but I cannot pretend anymore. I love you and I want to be here with you, but only if you feel the same way." For a moment, Quincy could not speak. Then he was swinging down from his horse and pulling her down from hers, his hands gentle on her waist. He cupped her face in his calloused hands and looked into her eyes. "I have loved you since that night in the rain," he said, "when you told me what you needed and trusted me to help you. Katherine, you are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I want nothing more than for you to stay with me forever." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home. Her lips were soft under his, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair, and for a long moment the rest of the world fell away. There was only Katherine, only the way she fit perfectly in his arms, only the sound of her breath catching as he deepened the kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Katherine was smiling through tears. "I never thought I could feel this way," she whispered. "I never thought I could trust someone like this." "You can trust me," Quincy promised. "Always." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, unable to stop smiling at each other. Clara took one look at them and let out a whoop of joy. "Finally," she exclaimed. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever." Katherine laughed, her cheeks flushing pink. "Were we that obvious?" "Only to everyone with eyes," Clara said, hugging her tightly. "I am so happy for you both." But their happiness was short-lived. 3 days later, Nathaniel returned, and this time he brought the law with him. The sheriff was a tired-looking man in his 50s, who clearly wanted no part of the situation he had been dragged into. He stood in Quincy's yard with his hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Lawson, Mr. Cooper here claims you are holding his sister-in-law against her will." "That is a lie," Katherine said, stepping forward. "I am here because I choose to be." "She does not know what she is saying," Nathaniel interrupted. "She has been influenced by this man. She is not thinking clearly." "I am thinking more clearly than I ever have," Katherine said angrily. "Sheriff, I am a grown woman. I have every right to choose where I live and with whom." The sheriff sighed. "That may be, Miss Cooper, but Mr. Cooper here says you have property that belonged to his brother, and he has a legal right to claim it." "What property?" Katherine asked. "I have nothing. Joseph left nothing but debts." Nathaniel smiled coldly. "There is the matter of your wedding ring. It was a family heirloom, and it rightfully belongs to the Cooper family." Katherine looked down at her left hand, at the simple gold band she still wore. It had never occurred to her to take it off. With a sudden fierce movement, she yanked it from her finger and threw it at Nathaniel's feet. "There. Take it. Take everything that came from your cursed family. I want nothing to do with any of you." The sheriff bent to pick up the ring, handing it to Nathaniel. "That settles it then. The lady has returned your property. I think we are done here." "This is not over," Nathaniel said, his face twisted with rage. "Katherine, you will regret this. When this cowboy gets tired of you, when he realizes what a burden you are, you will have nowhere to go, and I will not take you in then." "Good," Katherine said coldly, "because I would rather starve in the street than accept anything from you." They watched the two men ride away, and Quincy put his arm around Katherine's shoulders. "You are shaking." "I am angry," she said. "I am so angry I could scream. How dare he? How dare he try to control me like that?" "He cannot hurt you anymore," Quincy said. "He has no power over you now." But Katherine pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. "You heard what he said. He is right, Quincy. I am a burden. I have nothing to offer you, no dowry, no family, nothing but trouble." "Stop," Quincy said firmly, turning her to face him. "You are not a burden. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Do you understand that? I do not care about dowries or family connections. I care about you, about the woman who sat in the rain and chose to survive, who learned to ride like the wind, who makes my sister laugh and makes my house feel like a home. That is what matters. Katherine looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. I love you so much. Then marry me, Quincy said, the words tumbling out before he had consciously decided to say them. Marry me, Katherine. Not because you need protection, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because we love each other and we want to build a life together. Quincy, she breathed. I know it is fast, he continued. I know people will talk, but I do not care about any of that. I care about you, and I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. So what do you say? Will you marry me? Katherine laughed through her tears. Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. Clara let out a delighted cry from the doorway, where she had been shamelessly eavesdropping, and came running out to embrace them both. We need to plan a wedding, she announced. Oh, this is so exciting. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Seattle. Clara stood up as Katherine's maid of honor, and the local blacksmith, an old friend of Quincy's, served as his best man. Katherine wore a simple white dress that Clara had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair, and Quincy thought she had never looked more beautiful. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed Katherine with all the love and promise he could pour into it, and the small gathering of friends applauded. Even some of the townspeople who had known Joseph came to offer their congratulations, and if they thought the marriage was too soon after her first husband's death, they were polite enough not to say so. Nathaniel did not attend, and no one missed him. The wedding night was everything Quincy had dreamed of and more. Katherine came to him without fear, her hand steady as she unbuttoned his shirt, her eyes full of love and trust. They made love slowly, gently, Quincy taking his time to learn every inch of her body, to show her that intimacy could be tender instead of painful, that she was cherished instead of used. Afterward, Katherine lay in his arms and cried, but they were good tears, healing tears. I never knew it could be like that, she whispered. I never knew it could be beautiful. It will always be beautiful with us, Quincy promised, kissing her forehead, because we love each other, and that makes all the difference. Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Katherine threw herself into learning everything about running a ranch, from keeping accounts to helping with the spring branding. She had a natural head for numbers, and soon took over managing the books, freeing Quincy up to focus on the physical work. Clara continued her studies, and Katherine began helping her prepare for the teaching examination she would need to pass. The three of them became a tight-knit unit, working together and supporting each other. On Sundays, they would have dinner together and then sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about their dreams for the future. I want to expand the herd, Quincy said one evening. We have good grazing land, and we could support twice as many cattle as we have now. That would take capital, Katherine pointed out, but I have been looking at our finances, and I think we could manage it if we are careful. Always so practical, Quincy teased, pulling her close against his side. Someone has to be, she retorted, but she was smiling. Clara looked out at the sunset and sighed contentedly. I am going to miss this when I go to the teaching college next year. We will miss you too, Katherine said. But we will visit and you will come home for holidays. Will I? Clara asked, a mischievous glint in her eye. Or will you two be too busy with babies to bother with me? Katherine blushed and Quincy laughed. There will always be room for you, Clara, you know that. But Clara's words proved prophetic. 5 months after the wedding, Katherine realized she had missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when a second month passed, she went to see the doctor in town. He confirmed what she had already suspected. She was going to have a baby. Katherine stood outside the doctor's office, Her hand pressed to her still flat stomach, and felt a wave of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked her off her feet. Fear, joy, terror, hope, all mixed together until she could not tell one from the other. She had never dared to think she might be a mother, not after the years of violence and fear with Joseph. But now, carrying Quincy's child, she felt as if her life was finally, truly beginning. Quincy was in the barn when she got home, and she stood in the doorway watching him work for a moment, memorizing the sight of him. His shirt was off in the summer heat, his skin tanned and glistening with sweat as he lifted bales of hay. He looked up and saw her, and his face broke into that beautiful smile that made her heart skip. "Katherine, I did not hear you come in. How was your trip to town?" "It was good," she said, walking toward him. "Quincy, I have something to tell you." He set down the hay bale, suddenly serious. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No," she said quickly. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is wonderful, actually." She took his hands in hers. "Quincy, we are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her. Then his face transformed, joy lighting up his features like the sun breaking through clouds. He let out a whoop of delight and picked her up, spinning her around before gently setting her back down. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Katherine, we are going to have a baby." "We are," she confirmed, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Quincy cupped her face in his hands. "I am the happiest man alive. You have given me everything, Katherine. A home, a family, a reason to wake up in the morning. I love you so much." "I love you too," she whispered, and he kissed her with such tenderness that she felt her heart might burst. Clara was beside herself with excitement when they told her, immediately beginning to make plans for the nursery and knitting tiny blankets. She would sit with Katherine in the evenings, her needles clicking away, talking about names and whether the baby would have Quincy's blue eyes or Katherine's gray ones. The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Quincy would hold her hair back while she retched, bringing her cool water and crackers afterward. But as the months passed and her belly swelled, she began to bloom. She had never felt more beautiful or more alive. Quincy treated her like she was made of glass, constantly worried that she was doing too much, lifting too much, working too hard. Katherine found it both endearing and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from sweeping the porch. "I need to keep moving." I know," he said, holding up his hands. "I just want to take care of you." "You do take care of me," she said, kissing his cheek. "Every single day, but you have to let me take care of myself too." As winter approached, Katherine grew larger and more uncomfortable. She could no longer ride, which frustrated her immensely, and her back ached constantly. But through it all, she remained determined and hopeful, counting down the days until she would meet their child. The baby came on a cold February night in 1884, arriving 3 weeks early in a rush of pain and fear and overwhelming love. Clara had ridden to town to fetch the midwife, but the baby did not wait. Quincy delivered his own son, his hands shaking as he caught the tiny, slippery body and heard the first wailing cry. "A boy," he said, his voice breaking. "Katherine, we have a son." The midwife arrived 20 minutes later to find everything already done. The baby cleaned and wrapped in blankets, nursing at Katherine's breast while Quincy sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, both of them staring at their child with expressions of pure wonder. "Well," the midwife said with a smile, "looks like you did not need me after all." They named him Michael Joseph Lawson, using Katherine's maiden name as his middle name to honor her family rather than her first husband. He was a healthy baby with a shock of dark hair and his mother's gray eyes, and from the moment he was born, He had both his parents completely wrapped around his tiny finger. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Michael was a fussy baby who did not sleep well, and Katherine walked the floors with him night after night, singing lullabies and rocking him gently. Quincy would wake to find her asleep in the rocking chair, the baby finally quiet against her chest, and he would carefully take Michael from her and carry her back to bed. They learned together, figuring out what made their son cry and what made him smile. Clara was an enthusiastic aunt, always ready to hold the baby or sing to him or make funny faces to get him to laugh. The ranch house was filled with the sounds of a baby, and it felt more like a home than ever before. When Michael was 6 months old, Katherine finally felt ready to start riding again. Quincy was reluctant at first, still protective, but she insisted. They rode out together one morning, leaving Michael with Clara, and Katherine felt the wind in her hair and remembered what freedom felt like. "I needed this," she said, looking over at Quincy with a radiant smile. "I love being a mother, but I needed to remember who I am too." "You are amazing," Quincy said simply. "You are an amazing mother, an amazing wife, and an amazing woman. Do not ever forget that." Time moved forward in the way it does, days blending into weeks and weeks into months. Michael grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a little boy with his mother's stubbornness and his father's kind heart. Clara graduated from teaching college and took a position at the school in Seattle, though she came home every weekend to visit. When Michael was 3, Katherine found herself pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier. She carried the baby through the summer and into the fall, and on a crisp October morning, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose Clara Lawson, and she was the image of her father, with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Michael was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to hold her and help take care of her. Quincy would find him sitting beside her cradle, singing the lullabies he had heard his mother sing, and his heart would swell with love for both his children. Life on the ranch was full and rich. The herd had grown, just as Quincy had wanted, and they were prospering. Katherine managed the books and kept everything running smoothly, and she began to teach Michael his letters and numbers, preparing him for school. Clara met a young lawyer in town and began courting him, bringing him to Sunday dinners where Quincy interrogated him mercilessly, much to Katherine's amusement. They had challenges, of course. There was the harsh winter when they lost several head of cattle to the cold, and the spring when the river flooded and nearly destroyed the barn. There was Michael falling from a tree and breaking his arm, and Rose developing a fever that had them up all night with worry. But they faced everything together, Quincy and Katherine, their love deepening with each passing year. Katherine never saw Nathaniel again. She heard through town gossip that he had moved to California, and she felt nothing but relief. That part of her life was over, closed like a book she would never need to open again. Instead, she focused on the present, on the family she had built with Quincy. They added 2 more children over the years, another son named Thomas and then a daughter named Lily. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the sound of children's laughter became the backdrop to their daily lives. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quincy took Katherine back to Seattle, to the place where he had first found her. The old mercantile was gone now, replaced by a new store, but they stood on the spot where the steps had been, and Katherine looked up at her husband with tears in her eyes. "You remember what you said to me that night?" she asked. "Tell me what you need," Quincy quoted softly. "And I needed everything," Katherine said. "I needed safety, I needed hope, I needed love, and you gave me all of that and more. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." "You gave me the same," Quincy said, pulling her close. I was just going through the motions before you, Katherine. Working the ranch, taking care of Clara, but not really living. You taught me what it means to truly live, to love with everything I have. These 10 years with you have been the best years of my life. Here is to 50 more, Katherine said, standing on her toes to kiss him. At least, Quincy agreed, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They returned to the ranch to find Clara had organized a surprise party for them, with friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate. The children were dressed in their Sunday best, and Michael, now 13 and nearly as tall as his father, gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. As the sun set and the party wound down, Quincy and Katherine stood on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Rose was teaching Lily to catch fireflies while Thomas tried to show Michael a new card trick he had learned. Clara and her husband, now married themselves and expecting their first child, sat on the porch swing, her head on his shoulder. "This is everything," Katherine said quietly. "This life we have built together, it is everything I ever wanted." Quincy wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on the top of her head. "It is everything I never knew I needed," he said, "until that rainy night when I found you." "We found each other," Katherine corrected, turning in his arms to look up at him. "And we have been finding each other every day since." Years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, by graduations and weddings, by the birth of grandchildren. Michael grew up to become a veterinarian, caring for animals throughout the county. Rose married a young rancher and moved to a spread just a few miles away. Thomas took over running the ranch with Quincy, and Lily, their youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a writer, her stories published in magazines throughout the West. Clara and her husband had 3 children of their own, and the Lawson Ranch became the gathering place for the extended family. Every Sunday, the house would fill with children and grandchildren, with noise and laughter and love. Quincy and Katherine grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies moving more slowly. But their love never dimmed, never faltered. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodbye in the morning and hello in the evening. They still looked at each other with the same wonder they had felt on their wedding day. On a warm summer evening when Quincy was 74 and Katherine was 71, they sat together on the porch swing, watching the sun set over the mountains they had looked at for decades. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined, and they swayed gently back and forth. "Do you ever regret it?" Katherine asked suddenly. "Taking me in that night, your life would have been simpler without me." Quincy turned to look at her, this woman who had been his partner through everything, and he smiled. "Simpler, yes," he agreed, "but infinitely emptier. Katherine, you are the best decision I ever made. You and our children and this life we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. I would not change a single thing." "Not even the hard parts?" she asked. "Not even those," he confirmed. "Because the hard parts taught us how strong we are together, how much we can endure when we have love. And we do have love, Katherine. So much love that sometimes I think my heart cannot possibly hold it all." Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house behind them, they could hear the voices of their children and grandchildren, the sound of family dinner being prepared, the laughter of the next generation. "Tell me what you need," Quincy said softly, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago. Katherine smiled, her eyes closing. "I have everything I need," she whispered. "I have you, I have our family, I have this beautiful life. There is nothing more to ask for." "Good," Quincy said, kissing the top of her head, "because I am not going anywhere. We still have years ahead of us, you and I. Years to spend watching our grandchildren grow, years to sit on this porch and count our blessings. And they did have those years, many more of them. They watched Michael's children grow up and start families of their own. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by 4 generations of Lawsons. They held great-grandchildren in their arms and marveled at the legacy they had created together. Through it all, through every joy and sorrow, every triumph and challenge, Quincy and Katherine faced it together. Their love the foundation on which everything else was built. They had started with nothing but hope and determination. 2 broken people finding each other in a rainstorm, and they had created something beautiful and lasting. When people asked Katherine about her life, about how she had survived and thrived after such a difficult beginning, she would always give the same answer. She would smile, her eyes finding Quincy across the room, and she would say, "I sat in the rain, and he sat beside me and asked what I needed. And then he spent the rest of his life making sure I had it." It was a simple story, really. A cowboy and a woman, a rainy night and a single question. But from that simple beginning had grown a love story that would be told and retold by the Lawson family for generations to come. A testament to the power of kindness, courage, and love. On a peaceful morning in early spring, when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom across the ranch lands, Quincy and Katherine sat together on their porch for the last time. He was 89, she was 86, and they had been married for 63 years. Their children and grandchildren had all come to visit, filling the house with life and love one more time. But as the afternoon sun began to slant through the windows, Quincy and Katherine slipped away to their bedroom, needing a quiet moment together. They lay down on the bed they had shared for so many years, Quincy's arm around Katherine's shoulders, her head resting on his chest. "I can hear your heartbeat," Katherine murmured. "It sounds like home." "You are my home," Quincy said, his voice soft. "You always have been." They talked quietly about the life they had lived, about the children they had raised, about all the moments big and small that had made up their years together. They talked about the night in the rain, about that first kiss by the broken fence, about the birth of each of their children. They talked until the words ran out, and then they simply held each other, content in the silence. Katherine fell asleep first, her breathing evening out, and Quincy lay there with her in his arms, thinking about how lucky he had been. He had been given a gift that rainy night in Seattle, a gift beyond price. He had been given love, true and deep and lasting, and it had made every moment of his life worthwhile. He closed his eyes, still holding Katherine, and let himself drift away, peaceful and complete. They were found the next morning by Rose, who had come to bring them breakfast. She stood in the doorway and saw them lying together, peaceful in death as they had been in life, and through her tears, she smiled. Because she knew, as all their children knew, that her parents had been blessed with something rare and precious. They had found each other in the rain, and they had loved each other every day after, right until the very end. The funeral was held on a beautiful spring day, and it seemed as if the entire county came to pay their respects. Quincy and Katherine were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, "Together in life, together in eternity." Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around the graves, and Michael, the oldest, spoke for all of them. "They taught us what love looks like," he said, his voice strong despite his tears. "They showed us that it is possible to overcome anything if you have someone who truly sees you, who chooses you every single day. They built this family on a foundation of love and respect and kindness, and that is their legacy to all of us." The family stood together on that hillside, united in their grief and their gratitude, and they knew that the story of Quincy and Katherine would live on in each of them. Every time they chose love over fear, every time they showed kindness to a stranger, every time they held their own partners close and whispered words of love, they would be honoring the legacy of the cowboy who sat beside a woman in the rain and asked her what she needed. Because in the end, that was what it all came down to. One person seeing another person's pain and choosing to help. One moment of compassion that had rippled out across decades, creating a family, a legacy, a love story for the ages. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each new family adding their own chapter to the story. But the original house, the one Quincy had built and Katherine had made into a home, was preserved exactly as it had been. And on the mantel above the fireplace, where Quincy and Katherine had sat on so many evenings, there was a photograph of them on their 50th wedding anniversary, smiling at each other with the same love and joy they had felt on their wedding day. Below the photograph was a small plaque, placed there by their children with the words that had started it all. "Tell me what you need." And in the hearts of everyone who knew their story, the answer was always the same: love, courage, hope, a hand to hold in the darkness. Someone who would sit beside you in the rain and refuse to leave until the storm had passed. That was what Katherine had needed on that rainy night in 1882, and that was what Quincy had given her, along with a lifetime of love and partnership and joy. Their story was proof that sometimes the most profound love stories start in the darkest moments, that hope can be found even in the midst of despair, and that true love, once found, can last a lifetime and beyond. The Lawson family continued to gather at the ranch every year on the anniversary of Quincy and Katherine's wedding, a tradition that persisted for generations. They would tell the story of how their family began, ensuring that no child grew up without knowing about the cowboy and the woman in the rain. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with the words that had become the family motto: "Tell me what you need." Because that simple question, asked with genuine compassion, had changed everything. It had saved a life, created a family, and proven that love, real love, was the most powerful force in the world. Quincy and Katherine's love had been tested by hardship and strengthened by joy, and it had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And somewhere, in the realm beyond this one, two souls walked hand in hand through fields of wildflowers, finally at peace, finally home, together forever, just as they had always been meant to be.